Ambassador Taylor had spent most of his life as a diplomat, representing his country in various foreign lands. Now, at 60 years old, he was ready to put the weight of the world behind him. After 30 years of service, it was time to retire, to return to simpler pleasures. And for Taylor, there was no greater pleasure than gardening. After settling in Maple Ridge Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood where the perfect lawns gleamed under the sun, Taylor had purchased a modest house, perfect for his new life. He had plans to turn his backyard into a garden, not just any garden, but one dedicated to growing rare, heritage vegetables. The crops were not only part of his retirement project but also tied to a UN biodiversity initiative, a cause that had been close to his heart for years. These plants, worth over $53,000, were meant to help preserve endangered species and encourage sustainable agriculture worldwide. For Taylor, this wasn't just about growing food. It was about leaving a legacy. Little did he know, the peace he sought would soon be interrupted by a force he wasn't prepared for. The Homeowners Association HOA, led by Eleanor Whitfield, the self-appointed enforcer of neighborhood order. Taylor's first encounter with Jimmy Foxter, a young, determined boy who seemed to take pleasure in keeping the peace of the neighborhood, was as unpleasant as it was inevitable. Jimmy had been working on his own garden, taking great pride in the meticulous care he put into his plants. But when he noticed Taylor's unkempt, sprawling garden, his youthful enthusiasm for rules and order made him eager to step in. "Mr. Taylor," Jimmy said, his voice firm for someone his age, "your garden isn't following the HOA guidelines. The yard's too wild. This neighborhood is about maintaining a certain aesthetic, and your garden just doesn't fit." Taylor was taken aback. He had been through much worse in his diplomatic career, but facing a young boy as his adversary seemed strangely frustrating. He had thought the HOA would be run by adults, but here was a child, full of righteous energy, standing between him and his project. "Jimmy, my garden is part of an important biodiversity project. These plants are rare, and they are part of a larger initiative I'm involved in with the UN." Jimmy crossed his arms over his chest. "I don't care what kind of project it is. The rules are clear. The garden's got to be neat and orderly. If it's not, you'll have to take it down." Taylor sighed, trying to keep his cool. "Jimmy, I assure you, these plants are part of something far more significant than a simple garden. I'm trying to make a difference in the world. This project could help preserve endangered species of plants." Jimmy's face softened for a moment, but then his expression turned back to stone. "I'm just doing what the HOA tells me. If you don't make it right, I'll report it." Taylor watched as Jimmy turned on his heel and walked away, his small frame growing smaller with every step. The boy might have been young, but he had the iron will of someone who thought rules were absolute, and those who defied them needed to be put in their place. Weeks passed, and the tension between Taylor and Jimmy, fueled by the HOA's rules, only grew worse. Taylor continued to work diligently in his garden, determined to see the plants thrive. But the HOA's warnings didn't stop. Letters, calls, and threats about fines came in regular intervals. It seemed the young boy had somehow become the HOA's unofficial enforcer, reporting every little infraction Taylor made, no matter how insignificant. Taylor had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but this felt like an endless battle. He was beginning to feel the weight of the HOA's pressure. Every time he worked in the garden, he knew that someone, somewhere, was watching him, waiting for the smallest misstep. The once peaceful project was quickly turning into a source of constant anxiety. Then came the day that changed everything. Taylor had been away for a few days, attending a conference in Geneva. When he returned home, the garden was the first place he headed. But as he stepped into the backyard, a wave of dread washed over him. His beautiful, thriving plants, his pride and joy, were dead. The vegetables, once vibrant and promising, were now wilted, discolored, and shriveled beyond recognition. The soil, which had once been rich and full of life, was barren. Taylor stepped closer, his stomach sinking with every step. The scent in the air was foul, a sharp chemical stench that made his head spin. He ran his hands through the soil, feeling a strange dryness to it, like something had been poured over it. Something unnatural. His heart pounded as he noticed the faint traces of liquid near the plants, the remains of something that shouldn't have been there. Someone had poisoned his garden. Taylor quickly ran to the security camera he had installed, hoping for some answer. He rewound the footage, his breath catching in his throat as the events unfolded before his eyes. He saw Jimmy, the young boy who had been so diligent in reporting his every move, sneaking into the garden late at night. But it wasn't just him. A figure stood next to Jimmy, a man whose face was partially obscured by shadows, but Taylor immediately recognized him. It was Douglas, the president of the HOA, a man known for his cold demeanor and iron grip on the neighborhood rules. Together, they poured something from a bottle onto the plants, their movements careful and deliberate. Taylor's blood ran cold. This wasn't just an accident. This was sabotage. The garden had been poisoned, and now Taylor had the proof. Victor, a neighbor who had become a confidant over the past few months, came over later that evening. He had been watching the events unfold from his window, and now he stood in Taylor's yard, staring at the damage. "I warned you," Victor said quietly, shaking his head. Eleanor's little enforcer, Jimmy, has always been eager to please. But now Douglas, the HOA president, is in on it too. They've been working together for years, running the HOA like a racket. You were right about them all along. Taylor clenched his fists, fury and disbelief coursing through his veins. "I'm not going to let them get away with this," he muttered under his breath. Victor's eyes darkened. "You need to hit them where it hurts, Taylor. You can't let this go unnoticed. You need more than just a video. You need a plan, something that will expose them for what they really are." Taylor turned to the footage again, his mind racing. He had been a diplomat his whole life, and now, it was time to use his skills for something personal. He had the evidence, the support, and the knowledge of how to make the most of it. But he needed leverage, something that would shake them to their core. "I have an idea," Taylor said slowly, a spark of determination igniting in his eyes. "It's time to show them who they are messing with." Taylor spent the next few days formulating a plan, his mind working with the precision of a diplomat. The anger from the poisoning of his garden burned, but he knew that rash decisions wouldn't help him. He needed to be strategic, calculated. He couldn't just confront Douglas and Jimmy with accusations. He had to expose them, force them to reveal their true nature to the entire neighborhood. Victor had been a valuable ally, but Taylor knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. The HOA had been a powerful force in the neighborhood for years, and it wouldn't go down without a fight. But he wasn't about to let this go. Not when so much was at stake. The first step was gathering more evidence. The video footage was damning, but he needed something concrete. He'd learned enough during his years in diplomacy to know that the more information you had, the stronger your position. He called in a few favors from his old contacts, reaching out to people who could help him investigate the HOA further. It didn't take long before he had a treasure trove of documents, emails, meetings, and records that painted a clear picture of corruption within the HOA. Taylor knew he couldn't just use his old connections in government. He needed to get the whole neighborhood involved. This was bigger than just his garden. This was about the manipulation, the exploitation, and the control the HOA had over the people who lived here. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about them, the neighbors who had been suffering in silence for years, the ones who feared retaliation from the HOA if they ever spoke up. The time had come to unite them. Victor was the first to help rally support. He went door to door, quietly talking to neighbors and passing along Taylor's message. At first, people were hesitant, unsure of what could be done. But as the word spread, the walls of fear started to crumble. More and more neighbors came forward with their own stories. Stories of fines for trivial reasons, of rules that seemed to change depending on who you were, of an HOA that operated less like a governing body and more like a tyrannical regime. The response was overwhelming. The community was ready for change. They were ready to stand together, to finally take on the HOA that had held them hostage for so long. The next step in Taylor's plan was risky but necessary. He needed to get the attention of someone powerful, someone who couldn't be easily ignored. That's where the Secretary General of the United Nations came in. Taylor had been in contact with the UN for years through his diplomatic work, and he knew that if anyone could help him shed light on the corruption within the HOA, it was them. He sent an urgent message to the Secretary General, explaining the situation and the potential environmental and political ramifications of the HOA's actions. He didn't just want to bring attention to the poisoning of his garden. He wanted to expose the entire network of corruption that Douglas and Eleanor had built. If he could get the Secretary General involved, the HOA would have no choice but to pay attention. The Secretary General's office responded swiftly. They were interested, but they wanted more details before they could take any public action. Taylor knew what this meant. He needed to prepare. This wasn't just about exposing a few bad apples. This was about making sure the HOA's power structure crumbled completely. And so, as the Secretary General prepared for his visit, Taylor worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He organized a meeting with the HOA, planning to confront Douglas and Eleanor directly. He would bring everything to light: the poison garden, the corrupt activities, the exploitation of the community. But he needed to make sure everything was in place. If this was going to work, it had to be flawless. On the day of the meeting, Taylor stood at the front of the room, his hands clenched at his sides. The HOA board members filed in, their faces unreadable. Douglas walked in with his usual smug expression, followed closely by Eleanor, who seemed just as pleased with herself as ever. "Thank you for coming, everyone," Taylor began, his voice steady and calm, though the anger simmered beneath the surface. "I'm sure you're all aware of the situation regarding my garden. What you don't know is that this goes much deeper than a simple dispute about plants." He paused, letting the tension build before he continued. "I have here video evidence of the poisoning of my garden, evidence that clearly shows some of you taking part in this crime. But that's not all. I also have proof of the illegal activities that have been happening within this HOA for years. The manipulation of rules, the personal vendettas, the exploitation of your power for personal gain. And I'm not the only one who's been harmed. I've spoken to your neighbors, and many of them have similar stories." The room went silent as Taylor played the footage for everyone to see. Jimmy appeared first, creeping around the yard, followed by Douglas and Eleanor. The poison was poured with deliberate intent, the maliciousness of it clear in their actions. The board members watched, their faces a mix of shock and guilt. Douglas's face turned a deep shade of red as the video ended. He opened his mouth to speak, but Taylor was ready. "I've also invited someone who has an interest in this matter," Taylor continued. "Someone who will make sure the world knows what's going on here. Please welcome the Secretary General of the United Nations." The room erupted in murmurs as the Secretary General stepped into the room, flanked by security. The atmosphere shifted instantly. No one could pretend this was a small issue anymore. This was global. The Secretary General wasted no time. "What we're seeing here is an abuse of power, power that should be used to protect, not harm. Ambassador Taylor has shown incredible restraint in the face of clear wrongdoing, and the world is watching." Taylor stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Douglas and Eleanor. "The poisoning of my garden was just the beginning. What I'm asking for is a complete dismantling of this corrupt HOA. The community deserves better than what you've given them." The room fell silent once again, the weight of the situation sinking in. But there was no turning back now. Taylor had exposed them. He had done it, not through force or threats, but through truth. And that truth would not be silenced. Douglas and Eleanor tried to defend themselves, but their words rang hollow in the face of the evidence. One by one, the HOA board members began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, some of them avoiding eye contact, others looking visibly guilty. "You have no power here anymore," Taylor said, his voice unwavering. "This community is taking back control." Outside the meeting room, the neighbors had gathered, their faces determined. Victor stood at the front, holding a stack of legal documents. The community was united, and they would not let their voices be ignored any longer. The fight had only just begun, and this time, Taylor was not alone. The news spread quickly. By the time the meeting had ended, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with excitement and a sense of newfound hope. The HOA, once an oppressive force in the community, was finally exposed, and the power dynamics were beginning to shift. But Taylor knew this battle wasn't won yet. There were still many hurdles to clear before the HOA would be fully dismantled. As he left the meeting room, the weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. The Secretary General's presence had solidified the gravity of the situation, but now it was up to the community to press forward. He couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope as he saw the faces of his neighbors, many of whom were now visibly emboldened. Victor, in particular, had been a key figure in rallying support, his quiet determination inspiring others to join the cause. But not everyone was convinced. Some still harbored doubts, unsure of how far this fight could go or how long it would last. Taylor knew that changing minds wasn't easy, especially when the old guard of the HOA had such a firm grip on the neighborhood. He needed to maintain the momentum, to push harder now while the community was united. As the Secretary General's entourage left the meeting, Taylor's phone buzzed. It was Victor. His message brief but urgent. "We need to talk. It's bigger than we thought." Taylor stepped outside, taking a deep breath. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the front yards, but there was no time for relaxation. He dialed Victor's number as he walked toward his car. "Taylor," Victor answered, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "I've been digging into some of the documents we found. It's worse than we thought." "What do you mean?" Taylor's pulse quickened. "What have you found?" Victor's voice lowered, almost conspiratorial. "Douglas and Eleanor, they've been in bed with developers. Big ones. And they've been using the HOA to push through projects that benefit them personally. This garden poisoning, that was just one part of a much larger plan." Taylor stopped in his tracks. "You're saying they've been using the HOA to line their pockets with development deals?" Victor hesitated. "It's not just about money. It's about control. They've been influencing property values, manipulating zoning laws, and funneling funds into their own pockets. The community's been paying for all of this, and we've never had a say. It's all tied to a much larger web of corruption." Taylor's thoughts raced. He had suspected the HOA was corrupt, but this was far beyond anything he could have imagined. If Douglas and Eleanor had been involved in such a scheme for years, it was no wonder they were willing to go to such extremes to keep their power. The poison garden was just a small part of their larger plan to maintain control over the neighborhood. "This is bigger than just getting them removed from the HOA," Taylor said, his voice now hard with determination. "We need to expose the entire operation, every last detail. This is a crime, and I won't rest until they are held accountable." "Agreed," Victor said. "But we need more than just the documents. We need witnesses, people who can back up what we're saying. We need to show the world that this wasn't just a personal vendetta. This was systematic abuse." "I'll talk to the neighbors," Taylor said. "We've got to get everyone on board. If we can show how many people they've hurt, we'll have the power to take them down for good." Victor's voice softened, a note of admiration in his tone. "You've got this, Taylor. We're behind you. Just don't go too fast. We need to make sure we have everything lined up first." Taylor hung up the phone, his mind spinning with the enormity of the task ahead. This wasn't just about a poisoned garden anymore. This was about exposing a criminal network that had been operating in plain sight for years. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. He spent the next few days speaking with neighbors, gathering testimonials, and combing through the evidence. The more he learned, the clearer it became. Douglas and Eleanor had manipulated zoning laws, arranged fraudulent property deals, and used their position to push through plans that lined their pockets while leaving the community to suffer. Taylor wasn't just fighting for his garden anymore. He was fighting for every neighbor who had ever been fined, bullied, or forced to live under their oppressive rule. It didn't take long before Taylor's efforts began to bear fruit. More and more neighbors came forward, willing to speak out about their own experiences with the HOA's corruption. Some had been silenced with fines, others had been blackmailed into silence. But now, with the tide turning, they were ready to stand together. The community meetings grew in size as the weeks went by. Each time Taylor spoke, more people rallied to his cause, and the pressure on the HOA grew. Eleanor and Douglas could feel the walls closing in, but they refused to back down. They'd built their empire on the backs of their neighbors, and they weren't about to lose it all now. At a pivotal community meeting, Taylor stood at the front of the room, his voice unwavering as he addressed the gathered crowd. "This isn't just about the HOA," he said, his words echoing in the packed room. "This is about the future of our neighborhood. About fairness. About justice. We've been silenced for too long, but no more. It's time to take back control." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, Taylor saw a spark of real hope in the eyes of his neighbors. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was their fight. They were united, and together, they would bring down the corrupt regime that had held them captive for so long. But as Taylor left the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to escalate. Eleanor and Douglas wouldn't go down without a fight. They had too much to lose, and Taylor knew they would do whatever it took to protect their empire. That night, as Taylor sat alone in his study, reviewing the final pieces of evidence, a knock at the door startled him. He opened it cautiously, his hand instinctively reaching for the file in his desk drawer. Standing on his doorstep was Victor, his expression grim. "It's happening," Victor said quietly. "They've gone too far." Before Taylor could respond, he saw the flicker of movement behind Victor's shoulder. A dark figure lurked at the edge of his property. Someone watching him, waiting. It was clear the battle was far from over. Taylor's heart skipped a beat as he stepped toward the door, trying to get a better look at the figure lurking at the edge of his yard. The shadowy figure didn't move, its presence unsettling, almost deliberate. The night was unusually still, with only the faint sound of distant cars humming in the background. "Who is that?" Taylor whispered, half to himself, but more to Victor, who had his hand resting on the edge of the door, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Victor stepped forward cautiously, glancing around the perimeter of the property. "I don't know," he said, his voice low. "But this doesn't feel right. We should have expected them to come after you. Now that we're exposing them, they are going to try to intimidate us." Taylor swallowed hard. He had been prepared for retaliation, but this felt different. He instinctively closed the door behind them, signaling Victor to follow him as they made their way to the back of the house. Taylor had a security system, and he wasn't about to let the moment slip by without using every resource he had. As they moved toward the backyard, Taylor's thoughts raced. Douglas and Eleanor had both been acting erratically in recent weeks, but to send someone to his home? This wasn't just about protecting their reputation anymore. This was about control, and they were willing to do anything to keep it. In the distance, the figure finally moved, slowly, deliberately, like it knew it was being watched. Taylor caught a glimpse of the silhouette, taller and broader than he had expected. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to hide anymore. "We need to call the police," Victor said, his hand hovering over his phone. "This could be serious." No, Taylor shook his head, his eyes locked on the figure. "We need to handle this ourselves. I'm done hiding. This ends now." Victor looked uncertain but didn't argue. He was right behind Taylor as they moved toward the back gate, careful not to make too much noise. The faint glow of the streetlights barely illuminated their path. Taylor's mind raced. This wasn't just about a confrontation in his backyard. It was about sending a message, not just to Douglas and Eleanor, but to the whole neighborhood. The figure had reached the back of the yard, just a few feet away from the gate that led to the alley. Taylor motioned to Victor to stay low. "We get close enough, I'll confront them. If they run, we've got them." Victor nodded, stepping back slightly as Taylor advanced with calculated steps. But just as he neared the gate, the figure turned and looked directly at him. It was a man, tall, with a cold, calculating stare. His eyes gleamed with the sort of hostility that made Taylor's blood run cold. "Not so fast," the man growled. "You've been digging around in things you shouldn't." Taylor took a deep breath, standing tall. "Who are you?" His voice was steady, but beneath it, there was an edge, a warning. The man didn't flinch. "You don't need to know. Just understand, you're in way over your head. This isn't just about your little garden, Mr. Taylor. It's bigger than that." Victor stepped up beside Taylor, his eyes now scanning the surrounding area for any signs of backup. "I think it's about time you told us exactly what you're involved in, before we make sure you regret it." The man smirked, then laughed, a chilling sound that sent a shiver through Taylor's spine. "You think you can stop us? You have no idea who you're messing with. We have everything under control. The Secretary General, the media, the whole damn city. It's all part of the plan. All of it." Before Taylor could respond, the man turned quickly, his silhouette merging with the darkness. He disappeared into the night, leaving the two men standing in stunned silence. "Did you catch that?" Victor asked, his voice almost a whisper. "The Secretary General? The media?" Taylor didn't answer right away. His mind was racing. This wasn't just a random act of intimidation anymore. It was an admission of a much larger conspiracy. Douglas, Eleanor, and their accomplices weren't just fighting to preserve their little kingdom in the neighborhood. They were involved in something far more dangerous, something much deeper than anyone had anticipated. "We need to move quickly," Taylor said, his voice resolute. "We've been playing catch-up, but now, we have the real enemy's attention. They are not going to stop until they've crushed us. It's time we fight back, and we do it smart. Victor nodded, a look of determination spreading across his face. We'll get the evidence we need. The neighbors will back us up. We'll expose them. The next few days were a blur of planning, gathering evidence, and rallying more support. The community that had once been passive now stood at the precipice of change, their collective resolve hardening. Taylor, fueled by the knowledge that they were up against far more than he had first imagined, didn't let up. He knew this was bigger than a petty neighborhood dispute. It was a battle for justice. The final blow came when Victor uncovered a series of encrypted emails between Douglas and some of the most powerful developers in the city. The emails detailed plans for large-scale projects that would significantly change the neighborhood, and not in a way that would benefit the residents. Taylor knew these documents could finally bring the full weight of the law down on their shoulders. But there was one final hurdle to clear: getting the information into the right hands before Douglas and Eleanor could act on their threats. The neighborhood rallied around Taylor, providing testimonies, support, and even more documentation. With every passing hour, their resolve grew stronger, but so did the threats. Douglas and Eleanor had made their move, sending hired thugs to intimidate and destroy whatever Taylor had built. But they had underestimated the power of the community. As the final meeting approached, the one that would decide the HOA's fate, Taylor stood at the front of the room, the documents in hand. The entire neighborhood, now united in their cause, gathered behind him. "I have one question for all of you," Taylor said, looking around at the faces that had once been divided, now determined and unwavering. "Are we going to let them continue to destroy what we've built? Or are we going to fight for our future?" The room erupted in a collective cheer. Douglas and Eleanor's empire was crumbling, piece by piece, and there was no stopping the momentum now. The fight for the neighborhood was no longer just about a poisoned garden. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen and ensuring that the abuses of power would no longer go unchecked. As the final vote was cast, and the HOA was officially dissolved, Taylor felt the weight of the struggle lift off his shoulders. But it wasn't over. The battle had just begun. What he had learned was that change wasn't easy, and it didn't come without cost. But when people stood together, there was no force stronger. And as he looked out over the community, his heart swelled with pride. This wasn't just about victory. It was about a new beginning, one that was built on justice, unity, and the determination to protect what was right. The neighborhood was finally free, and it was just the beginning of a new chapter.